Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from another witness formerly employed by Celetex. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. May I please now call Mr. Jamie Hayes?
The witness affirmation text.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes. Now do sit down, make yourself comfortable, all right? Right, yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Hayes, good morning.
Good morning.
May I begin by thanking you very much for your coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm asking you, then I'm very happy to put the question again or to put the question in a different way so that you can understand me and I can understand you. If you feel you need a break at any point, please let us know. We can do that. We do intend to take scheduled breaks at some point halfway through the morning and halfway through the afternoon. And also, could I please ask you to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your immediate right can get down everything you're saying. And also, please, if you nod your head or shake your head, it doesn't go onto the transcript, so please say yes or no, as the case may be. Now, you've made two statements for the inquiry, and I'd like to show you the first of those, please. It's at CEL 000-10154 of the 11th of March 2019. You can find it on the screen in front of you, or if you want to look at the hard copy, it's on in the file on the desk in front of you as well. But I will be showing you everything on the screen. The date is the 11th of March 2019. Is that the first page of that document?
Yes, it is.
And although the front page says 12th of March 2019, if you go to page 31, please, you can see that on that page there's a signature over your printed name. Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Now, the date there is the 27th of August, and it says to have been signed by instructed solicitors on the 11th of March 2019. Can you just explain how that came about?
I believe from memory that we may have been working on the statement, that's me and my legal advisors, until, I wouldn't say the last minute, but until I believe that there was a deadline for it to be submitted by. And I think it was finished very close to that deadline. And so perhaps they signed it on my behalf.
Right. When they signed it on your behalf, did you instruct them to sign it, having seen and approved?
Absolutely, yes, that's correct.
And then it was signed by you, is this right, actually signed by you on the 27th of August 2019?
That's correct.
And can you just explain the delay between the March and the August of that year?
I can't really explain that. I think that would have been my legal team. They presented it to me and said, it seems that you have not signed this document and you need to sign it yourself. And so can you please sign this document yourself so that we can provide a proper signed...
Yes, thank you. Have you read this witness statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Now, there's also a second statement at CEL 3012232, and that is the first page of that document. You can see, Mr. Hayes, that it bears a date of the 5th of June 2020 at the top. Is that your second statement?
Yes, it is.
And if we go to page 5 in that document, you'll see a signature over the date of the 5th of June 2020. Is that yours?
It is, yes.
And have you read this second statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And again, can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes, I can.
Have you discussed your evidence that you're going to give today with anybody before coming here today?
I have discussed it in a general way with my legal advisors.
Right, but just to be clear, no one's prompted you as to what you should say in response
No,
to
definitely
questions
not.
that I might be asking you.
No.
Right. Now, I just want to begin with a number of questions about your your background, if I may. It's right that you joined Celetex in 2004, I think,
That's correct.
and that was in a temporary administrative role, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
And before that, you hadn't worked in the insulation industry at all, had you?
No, I hadn't.
Did you have any technical experience at that point?
No, I didn't.
And I think you've got no tertiary education or technical qualification.
No, that's correct.
And you were then offered a permanent role as a customer services officer in the sales department. Is that right?
That's correct.
But again, that's not or wasn't a technical position.
No, it wasn't.
And is it right that from June 2007, you were a technical services officer, or a TSO, in the technical team of Celetex?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. And as such, you were, I think, client or customer facing, weren't you?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
And if we look at your statement, that is your first statement, can we please go to that at pages 2 and 3, bottom of page 2, top of page 3, this is paragraph 7, under the heading the technical team. You say, in or around June 2007, an opportunity arose for me to move to the technical team at Celetex. This was not a team with any expertise in technical product matters, but rather a customer support team focused on practical product application and part of the wider marketing arm of the business. The technical team sat squarely within the marketing department alongside a specific marketing team. And then you go on to say in paragraph 8, at the beginning there, that no qualifications were required for the position in the technical team. Why was it called the technical team?
Because it would answer what we perceive to be technical inquiries regarding our products. So a typical inquiry would be, you know, what particular product of yours might I need for my application, which might be a floor or a wall or a roof. And we would also do U-value calculations, which were thermal calculations. And I think that they were perceived to be technical questions, as opposed to, for example, in my previous role, we would field inquiries from our purchasing customers, and their types of questions would be, how much does it cost? Can I have a delivery? And so there was a clear distinction, I guess, between those two types of inquiries that were coming into the business.
Yes, I see. If the team's role wasn't technical in the sense of research and development or complex chemistry, is it right that some of the matters on which you were advising customers in that team called for a degree, at least, of technical understanding?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Yes. Now, you say, as I've shown you in paragraph 7 on the page in front of you, that the technical team sat squarely within the marketing department. Does that mean that the development of new products was also overseen by the marketing team?
Yes, it does.
And is it fair to say that Celetex's business model was really driven by the marketing team?
Yes, that's correct.
Was the technical team ever able, in your experience, to override the marketing department's marketing decisions on technical grounds?
No.
So would you say that the technical team was really an adjunct to Celetex's marketing capabilities?
Yes, I would say that, and I think that the direct line of reporting, I think, always ended with the marketing director, as opposed to having a separate technical director, for example.
Yes. Now, you were promoted to technical services team leader, weren't you?
I was.
And when was that?
I believe it was January 2015.
15. And what did that involve, that new role?
So the business had been slightly restructured at that time. So there had never been a technical services team leader before. It was a created role. And so I took on responsibility for certain day-to-day tasks in terms of organising that team. So to give a couple of examples, the technical team, which was quite a small team, would split it. Each individual person would split their time between dealing with emails, possibly in the morning, and then covering the telephones in the afternoon. So there was a rota, and I would create that rota. To start with, that was pretty much the limit of my responsibilities, but over my time as a technical service team leader, I took on more responsibility in terms of administration of personnel. So I would, with my manager, assist with carrying out appraisals for people. And I also later on was given responsibility for signing off people's holiday requests, and also conducting a return to work interviews when somebody had a day off.
And who was your manager? Who was your line manager at that time, or from January 2015 when you were promoted to technical services team leader?
It was Louise Garlick.
Louise Garlick, okay. And before that time, who was your management line
It was
manager?
Rob Warren.
I see. And as at the period 2012 to the end of 2014, who was your line manager? Was that Rob Warren throughout?
Yes, Rob Warren remained my line manager until I became technical services team leader, because I think that the same restructuring that changed Rob's role slightly was the same restructuring, and at the same time that I was made technical services team leader.
And how did your role relate to Debbie Berger's role once she'd taken over the role of product manager on the 1st of October 2014?
So we moved into completely different reporting streams. So I would report to Louise Garlick. Louise Garlick reported to Craig Chambers, who was the CEO or managing director. I understand that Debbie reported to Paul Evans, who reported directly to Craig Chambers.
Yes. So you were essentially in parallel with Debbie Berger.
Yes, we worked in different departments, but I would say that we were kind of peers, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you continued in that role, the role of technical services team leader, until you left Celetex.
That's correct.
Now, just looking at your training, you say that no qualifications were required for your role, in fact, any of your roles. Is that right?
That's correct.
And given your work history before you started at Celotex, you wouldn't have acquired any technical expertise before that, would you?
No.
And I think it must be right that you received no formal training for your position when you started.
That's correct.
And given that you were being asked to offer practical advice on matters such as product application, did you have any concerns about your ability to fulfill your job description without any training?
Yes, I did at first. I think I mentioned in my statement that I felt quite overwhelmed by the position when I first joined. I was quite lucky because there was a lady that I worked with who was Bourgeois. She kind of took me under her wing a little bit, and she would help me, and we would have breakout sessions. So if I had a question and I wasn't sure how to answer it, or if I'd heard terminology that I didn't understand, we might spend an informal sort of 15 minutes at her desk, and she would run me through some things.
I see. And in what years do you think that happened?
I actually don't think that I started to have a real confidence in my role probably for about 18 months.
So 2006?
Yes.
I see. Looking at paragraph 9, which should still be on the page in front of you, if you go down a little bit on that page in your statement, you say that in the middle of the paragraph, you say, I did undergo some informal training in the processes and procedures needed for my new role, where I would be taken through how to answer certain queries using technical data, help sheets and handy guides produced by Celetex. Who was it who produced those guides?
That literature existed in the business before I joined the technical team, and so I don't know who wrote them, but I got the impression that some were older than others, so there might have been some which were dated quite a long time ago. They might have been several years before they'd been updated, and then others which were more recent. I know that there was a gentleman called Peter Gibson,
yes,
who was technical manager, I think, and he may well have had a part to play, but I'm sure that the presentation of them and formatting them, putting them together, would have also been done by the marketing team.
Now, you say 5 lines down within the sentence I've been looking at that you were taken through how to answer certain queries. Were those queries, in your experience, about the suitability for a product on an external wall construction above 18 metres?
No, they weren't. In fact, the vast majority of inquiries that Celetex received, I think throughout the time that I was there, was to do with houses. So a house that, a semi-detached house, a detached house, a terraced house. And very few of our inquiries, although some of them, were to do with larger types of buildings where those types of construction, like rain screen, would be more common.
And were those queries from time to time about fire safety of the products you were selling, Celetex was selling?
There would be questions about fire safety, but they would be very basic, such as, is your product class 1, for example? And to answer that would be simply to refer somebody to a product data sheet where the properties of the board were listed, and it would confirm the product to be class 1.
Yes, I see. Now, you say in paragraph 9, as I've just shown you, that you relied on product technical data sheets, and I think you refer there to an example of a data sheet, and you exhibit it. Let's go to that. It's CEL 408506, please. And is this the kind of data sheet that you would use when answering customers' queries in general?
I have to say that I have had a chance to look through my statement and its exhibits, and I don't think that this is a very good example of a data sheet. And the fault is entirely mine, but I think that when I was carefully proofreading my statement prior to signing it, which I would have done, I don't think that I checked every exhibit, and actually I think that a much better example could have been given of a data sheet than this one here. Right.
All right. Well, then let's not press that point too much. Let's move on to something which you would have seen, I think. CEL 50409. This is the RS 5000 data sheet produced by Celetex, and this is issue 1 of August 2014. Is this the sort of data sheet that you would have been familiar with?
Yes.
And is your evidence, in effect, that you had no technical knowledge but were wholly reliant on others within Celetex for the accuracy of the technical data contained in documents such as these?
That's correct. I think what I would say is that as my knowledge and experience grew, sometimes the technical team were asked to assist in preparations of these documents, mostly to do with thermal performance. So an example would be most of our product literature would contain U-value tables, which tells you if you have a certain construction and you use a certain thickness of insulation, this will give you a U-value of X. And so the technical team would assist with producing those tables, for example, because they would be based upon calculations that we would do. And that table, for example, would then be slotted into the document by the marketing team who are preparing it.
Can we look at Mr. Warren's witness statement, CEL 30010043, please? And I'd like to go to page 4 in that document and look with you at paragraph 16. Page 4, paragraph 16, at the bottom of the page there. Mr. Warren says, Jamie Hayes was one of the more experienced members of the CTC team. He was assigned responsibility for providing training to the team, and in particular to new starters. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I believe that I do reference that also in my own first statement.
And then he goes on to say, about 4 lines down, I do not remember devising the remainder of the training and did not deliver it, but my assumption, based on conversations with Mr. Hayes and from looking at an overview describing the topics to be covered, was that it was a fairly comprehensive training program delivered in modules and in person to the members of the team, which ranged from the basics of what is insulation right through to understanding all you need to know in the technical process to be able to respond to customer queries. Is that accurate?
It became accurate. I was given responsibility for training new members of the team, in the technical team, and I did, for my own benefit, put together a spreadsheet which would show the different topics that you would cover. And this would mostly be, for example, I'd have one topic and it would be cavity walls. And
Right.
so we would do that on a morning. And in the training of that morning, I would go through and I would say, this is a cavity wall. This is very broadly how a cavity wall is built up. This is how our product would be used in that cavity wall. This is our data sheet. Here is how you would perform a
Right.
U-value calculation for that cavity wall.
Okay, so you accept what Mr. Warren says there. And when you say it became accurate, was it, as he says it was, by 2012?
Yes, that is
Yeah.
correct.
And to deliver the training that Mr. Warren describes in his statement there, you would have had to have had some kind of technical understanding, wouldn't you, of the matters contained in the training?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Were you yourself given any training as to those technical matters, or were those matters simply matters that you, as it were, picked up on the job?
It was entirely picked up on the job.
Right. And indeed, you say at paragraph 12 of your statement, if we go to that, please, page 4, that you picked up knowledge regarding practical application of products over time. That's your first sentence in that paragraph. So that would be correct, wouldn't it, looking at
Yes.
what we're looking at so far?
That's correct.
And you also go on to say there, a little bit lower down the paragraph, at no point during my employment at Celetex did anyone ever check or test my knowledge of the product offering. There were no specified checks that the information we were providing to customers was correct, nor were there any checks that the industry knowledge I was obtaining was accurate. And you've confirmed the truth of that statement earlier in your evidence. Was that the case throughout your time at Celetex?
Yes, it was the case.
Now let's go to CEL 408515, please. This is an internal Celetex draft document. And the reason I say that is that if you look at the top of the page, under the word technical briefing, the first bullet point says draft. Was it a draft or was it a final document, do you think?
So I wrote this document, and it was never a formal Celetex document. It was produced by me to assist me with training people. And so I would have put the word draft. And I think the reason that I put the word draft is because it was never a formal document. It was a document that I used.
Yes, thank you. And you can see that it says Introduction to Fire Regulations and Standards, incorporates buildings above 18 metres, requirements of compliance with fire regulations, technical briefing.
That's correct.
And although it's a draft, you used it, I think is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yes, and you drafted it. And if we go to the bottom of the page, there's the logo, as we can see. We can't quite see it on the screen. I think you can just about see it. It says CTC. That's the Celetex Technical Centre, I think, isn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you sat in the Celetex Technical Centre. Who else did in 2012, 2013 and 2014?
So some people came and went, but I would do the best to...
Well, sorry, I should perhaps narrow it down a bit. Who were the main players throughout that period in that team?
So there was a gentleman called Sean Whelan. There was myself. There was Debbie Berger. There was a gentleman called Tom Elwell.
Yes.
I believe there was a gentleman called Richard Gifford, although I'm not 100% sure when Richard joined. And there was a gentleman called Jeremy Suttle.
Yes, and we've seen his name in later documents. If we go to page 2 in this document, you can see in the header that it's marked on the top left, JH, and that, I think, tells us that you drafted it.
That's correct.
And this is version 2, draft 26th of October 2010. And just looking at it briefly, we'll consider the content together in a moment, but just looking at it very briefly and staying on this page, these are the contents of the presentation, and you can see that it deals with standards of fire resistance for insulation, national standards, European standards, and Scottish standards, and then requirements for buildings above 18 metres in height, external walls at page 7. And if you go to page 8, you can see there's a reference about a quarter of the way down to Technical Services Information Bulletin 26, and there are a number of parts of that. Bulletin 26, does that tell us that there were historically a large number of bulletins, namely 25, produced by this department?
So Technical Services Information Bulletin 26 is a document which I inherited. So when I took over, went into the technical services team, I took over the desk of somebody who had left, and I believe that person was called Philip Eden. And I inherited a black folder, and in that folder were some technical services information bulletins, including number 26. And I think there were some other ones as well, although I don't think that the set was complete necessarily. But I don't believe that any of those bulletins had been produced by the CTC, if you like, which is the technical department where I worked. I believe that they had all been produced by senior people within the business. And I'm sure I exhibit this document and it will say who wrote it, but I believe it was Peter Gibson, who was the technical manager for Celetex, rather than somebody who sat within the technical team.
I see. And if we look a little bit lower down underneath that heading, it refers to the building regulations, and specifically section B4 of approved document B, and the reference there to the requirement of limited combustibility. You can see that in the second paragraph.
Yes.
And in the third paragraph under the heading Technical Services Information Bulletin, you can see it says the position in Scotland as well. And in both paragraphs, it says that the requirement is for the use of a non-combustible insulation product such as mineral wool. You see that?
Yes.
So was it clear to you and to those that you were training, so far as you were aware, that one of the routes to compliance with approved document B for insulation on buildings above 18 metres was to ensure that the material was non-combustible?
Yes, I would have understood that. Just to clarify that, I think that the understanding in the team was we had this document, and that document, I believe, is, I beg your pardon, we had Technical Services Information Bulletin 26, and I think that to produce this section of this document, I've effectively cut and pasted it in.
Right.
But it's not something that we would think about when we did our jobs, because when people came to us, and they did, and said, do you have a product which is suitable for a building above 18 metres, or do you have a alternative product to cool therm K15 for use in a tall building, the answer was always, no, we don't, sorry, and then they would move on. So yes, I had an awareness of this and had read and understood that document, but it was not something that we were required to understand the technicality of on a day-to-day basis.
I follow. So the answer is, when you were asked for a material for use above 18 metres, the answer was no, and you didn't really need to know why no, but you knew it was no.
Yes.
Okay. Then we look underneath that, and it says alternative compliance method. An alternative method of compliance with these regulations is to meet the performance criteria given in BR 135, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, 2003 edition, using data from full-scale fire testing to BS 84141 or BS 84142. This specifies limits for both external and internal fire spread defined by a maximum temperature rise in given time period. BR 135 is the basis on which Kingspan are currently able to obtain specifications for cool therm, despite the fact that the product is a combustible. We believe that the tested systems incorporate fire barriers to limit the spread of fire through the air cavity behind the rain screen. Celetex boards have, and this is capitalised, not been tested to this standard, but FR, and then it's 4,000, but corrected to 5,000, could potentially meet the standard if it were to be tested. At this point in time, we have decided not to pursue this line. Summary, Celetex boards cannot, bold, be used anywhere in any external wall constructions if the building is above 18 metres in height, and then this is in italics. This applies to all areas of walls, even those below 18 metres. There are a different number of ways of emphasising, but it's crystal clear from that, isn't it, that at this point, October 2010, the alternative method of compliance set out in this document was also not available to Celetex.
That's correct.
Yes. And if you go down a little bit further, the next page, please. You can see there, this is a heading of timed fire resistances. A little bit lower down that page, 3/4 of the way down the page, there's quite a lot of technical text, and I'm summarising it, but that was about other tests under BS 476, wasn't it?
Yes, this was not related to the above 18 metre test.
No. And were you aware at this time of something called National Class Naught?
Yes, I was.
And you were aware that this was entirely distinct from the requirements for buildings above 18 metres as they existed at that date?
Yes, I was.
And you were aware that Class Naught was something very different from the concept of non-combustible or limited combustibility?
I knew that they were different tests and that they weren't necessarily interchangeable.
Yes. Now, can we go to CEL 408500? This is a copy of a training pack that you, I think, delivered, the same document again. And if we go to page 11, this is a copy that Debbie Berger has disclosed. And if you go to page 11, this is version draft 1, 25th of October 2010. There's a quiz. And the training module, Fire Standards and Regulations Incorporating Buildings Greater than 18 metres in height. And then there's a note. The quiz is designed to demonstrate comprehension of the training session and not the ability to memorise information, etc. And then if you go to page 14, these are the questions. And they're questions about why Celetex products can't be used above 18 metres and what test meant that Kingspan could market K15 for use above 18 metres. And I've summarised those questions there, but you can see what they are. Am I right in my summary?
Yes, that's correct.
And we can see the answers at slide 9. And if you go to slide 9, page 9 of this document, here are manuscript answers to the quiz. And there's a date at the top, 5th of November 2010. Was this an actual training session, do you think?
Yes, so I believe that I had also given some training in a much sort of reduced form to area sales managers who came into the business, and this is something that I had been asked to do by Chris King, and he asked me, in fact, I believe, to do some simple quizzes with the area sales managers to check their understanding of what they had seen. I don't think that it was necessary for the CTC members to undertake the quiz. I think that Debbie has done it probably for a bit of fun, because I would have trained Debbie in terms of the CTC, and so she's also taken the quiz. But it wasn't, I don't believe, something that you had to do or a standard that you had to meet. I think we've done it for a bit of fun.
Yes. And at page 10, if we go to page 10, we can see the answers to the 4 questions which represented the slide I showed you before, and particularly question 14. And the answer to question 14 is that the fire test allowing Kingspan to use their phenolic product is in 18 metre and taller buildings is BS 8414 Part 1 or BS 8414 Part 2. So that was the answer. Did you know at the time, or did you think at the time, that Kingspan had actually passed both of those two parts of BS 8414?
No, I don't believe that I did.
Which did you think they had actually passed?
I don't think at this time, and I think this is dated 2010, I would have given that any thought. So the reason there's a reference to both of those is probably from the technical bulletin, where it references both of those tests as being something that you could do. But I don't think at that time I would have looked at whether Kingspan had done one test or another test.
And if we just go back a page to page 9, just finally on this document, one of the answers to the quiz questions related to class 0. And if you go to the questions or answers 7 and 8, you can see she's written down surface spread of flame, BS at 476 part 7, and then under question or answer 8, fire standard class 0, BS 476 part 7 and 6, surface spread of flame, and then propagate. I'm assuming that you and she and those you were teaching understood at least that much, that
Yes.
class 0 had these two parts to it.
I think from memory that was explicit on the Celetex literature. So if you looked at a product data sheet for FR 4000, for example, I think there would be a section and it would say fire performance, and it would say BS 476 part 6, and it would say BS 476 part 7. So sorry to go on, but yes, the short answer is there was an understanding that class 0 was formed of those two tests.
Yes, and we'll come back to this question very shortly again when looking at a later technical bulletin. Before I do that, can I just take a sideways visit and ask you some questions about the corporate culture within Celetex? You've already agreed with me, I think, that Celetex was largely marketing-led at the time you were there.
Yes.
If we go back to your statement, you see on page 6 at paragraph 16 that, if you look at that at the top of the page under the heading Saint-Gobain, you refer there to the acquisition of Saint-Gobain in 2012, of Celetex by Saint-Gobain in 2012. And you say this acquisition changed some of the processes within Celetex, including changes to health and safety on production line, environment and facilities. And then in the last sentence you say, in my experience, the acquisition also brought about a change in culture, particularly in the sense that there appeared to be increased financial pressure to develop new products applied to Celetex from Saint-Gobain. And then you go on to say, even before this acquisition, Celetex was largely marketing-led, given that those individuals at the top of the business had mainly originated from the marketing department. Celetex used to be owned by private equity group AAC Capital Partners, and so the drive for profit-making and increasing the company's share price had been systemic in the Celetex culture for some time. However, it seemed as though this culture became heightened once Saint-Gobain became involved. Now, when you say Celetex used to be owned by a private equity group, AAC Capital Partners, etc., did you get the sense at that time, and that's up to 2012 when the acquisition took place, that the drive for profit was also a drive for revenues?
Yes, I don't think it was a secret from anybody in the business at any level that the intention was that the company under AAC, that the goal of the management at that time was to make the business as profitable as possible in terms of how it would look on a balance sheet, and so to increase its value for somebody who's to buy it afterwards.
Yes. And then you go on to say, after the reference to conversations you've had, that Saint-Gobain had asked for a budget for increasing profits and that at least 15% of this increase would need to be attributed to new products. I remember thinking we were not allowed to simply sell more of our existing products to increase profits. For me, this meant that there was a drive for innovation and a sense of pressure to increase profits at Celetex. Is it your recollection that Celetex became even more marketing-driven following the acquisition of Saint-Gobain, or by Saint-Gobain in 2012?
Yes, I think that's fair.
And what made you feel that there was an increased pressure to develop new products?
Well, primarily this conversation I believe. And as it says there, they were talking about, and I think I'll also talk a bit later about hearing a conversation regarding the budget of Celetex and how it would have to be presented to Saint-Gobain in Paris. And it was referenced that they had to increase profits, and also that a certain percentage of that profit must come from new products.
Yes. And how did that pressure manifest itself on you personally at the time?
I don't think that in my role there was a personal pressure on me as an individual to do my role differently. And so it would have been the effect I saw on others, for example, as part of the above 18-metre project.
So what did you observe of the effect of this requirement from on high on what others in the business were doing around you?
So to give an example, and I know we'll come on to this, but after the first 18-metre test failed, a second test was arranged incredibly quickly. And although it didn't seem that strange to me at the time, I look back on that now and think it's almost unbelievable that I think only a few months passed between the failure of a major test and how quickly a second test was arranged, authorised, paid for, and not to mention the fact that you would have to actually arrange to build a rig, which is to say have all the materials, have someone construct it. And so how quickly they turned around between 1 to 2, I think illustrates quite well that they were not prepared to wait any longer than was humanly possible to progress that project. And I guess the ultimate goal of that project was to have a product which could be sold to increase profits.
Right. So in a nutshell, are you saying that the May 2014 second test of RS 5000, which took place, was really a manifestation in its clearest form of the culture which you describe at paragraph 16 and 17 of your statement?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you some questions next about your understanding of Celotex products in general. Can we start with MAX 50216, please? This is the data sheet for Celotex FR 5000, issue number 2, January 2012. And if you look at the top right-hand corner of the document, you can see that. Now, FR 5000 was a PIR board, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you understand that that meant that it was not, therefore, a product of limited combustibility?
Yes, I did.
And therefore it could not be used on buildings above 18 metres?
Yes.
And we can see from the data sheet in two places, the first paragraph and the fourth bullet point, that it's described as having Class 0 fire performance. And in that fourth bullet point it says, has Class 0 fire performance throughout the entire product in accordance with BS 476. What did you understand the significance of FR 5000 having Class 0 to be?
I understood that meant it had received a pass in 2 separate BS 476 fire tests, 476 Part 6 and 476 Part 7.
Yes. So you understood that the result of success in those 2 tests was that you got a Class 0 classification for this product.
Yes.
What was the significance to Celetex in marketing the product of that product having a Class 0 classification?
I believe that Celetex introduced the FR 4000 range, which was the first time that it had ever had a Class 0 product, and that the driver for that was that Celetex had PIR products and it competed against lots of other PIR products in the market, but that their main competitor, if you like, was Kingspan, and Kingspan's products were made of phenolic foam, and Kingspan's products were seen to be technically superior to all PIR products because they had a better thermal performance and they also had a better fire performance. So I believe that what the business wanted to do when it introduced the 4000 range was to step up its game and to, one, have a product which was or could be marketed as being more equivalent to Kingspan in terms of its technical properties, but also differentiate itself from other PIR.
Right.
And I think that there were three key ways that they wanted to do that. One was to increase its or improve its lambda value so that it would be, I think at that time it would have gone from 0.023 to 0.022, which would have been better than all of its other competitors in PIR, that it would have a Class 0 fire performance, which would match that of Kingspan's products, and that it would also have an improved thermal performance of its foil faces. And I think that's why they introduced it, and it was supposed to be a kind of a premium PIR, I think.
Right. Leaving aside the benefit of having Class 0 as a way of keeping up with or competing with Kingspan, my question was a slightly different one.
Sorry.
What would Class 0 signify to a buyer? What would it allow the buyer to do, which without Class 0 it couldn't?
Nothing, I don't believe.
Right.
I'm not aware of any application that Celetex was offering products into where Class 0, or in fact fire performance in general, had any relevancy. So I believe that that giving the product Class 0 was solely a marketing proposition.
Right. Okay. And maybe you can't help me, but what did, if you look at the fourth bullet point down, what did the statement Class 0 fire performance throughout the entire product in accordance with BS 476 signify?
I can remember a conversation at Celetex, and I think that Lizzie Seaton was in the room and perhaps somebody else. I'm sure there would have been someone else. And there was, I'm sure, a section in Kingspan's literature where it said Class 0 for the core only, or core only, or Class 0 for the foam core. And I think that there was an impression that that was not the correct way that you were supposed to test it, and that the reason that they had qualified that is because actually what you were supposed to do is test the product as you bring it to market. So if you have a board which is comprised of a foam core and it has a foil face at the top and the foil face at the bottom, that forms a complete product as you're selling it. And so therefore you should take that complete product, including all of its elements, and test it like that. And so I think that, and I might be wrong, but I think that's when Celetex tested Class 0, they tested it as it was, which is to say with the foil faces intact. And so you put that in and you receive your result. So I thought it was supposed to be a kind of a poke in the eye,
right,
to Kingspan to say we've tested Class 0 properly.
Right. I see. I mean, technically speaking, did the concept of Class 0 throughout the entire product actually have any real meaning?
No, I don't. I mean, I can only assume that if you tested something to Class 0, you would submit your samples to the test body. They would do whatever tests were correct to do. And so actually, to say it's throughout the product is just a marketing proposition, I think.
Right, okay. Either way, you were, I think, aware, as you've told us, that even though FR 5000 had Class 0, whatever throughout the entire product might or might not mean, you knew that it couldn't be used in buildings higher than 18 metres.
Yes, that's correct.
And you were therefore aware that there were requirements which products which could be used above 18 metres had to meet.
Yes.
Yes. Now, paragraph 25, you refer to, of your statement, you refer to the development of FR 5000 and a product called FR 4000. Just have 25 up on the screen. I'm not going to read it all out to you, but that's where you deal with this. And you say that the thermal conductivity of this product was improved, which then resulted in FR 5000. So was FR 4000 effectively a predecessor to FR 5000?
Yes, so my understanding was that there was no difference at all in that product from 4,000 to 5,000, apart from the fact that it went from a lambda value of 0.022 to a lambda value of 0.021. So it hadn't changed in respect of its fire performance, for example.
Right. Now, at paragraph 28 of your statement at page 9, if we can just flip over to that, please, you say, and again, I'll summarise, that RS 5000 was not a new product, but was a rebranding of FR 5000 to be used above 18 metres.
Yes, that's correct.
And therefore there were no changes to the chemical composition that you knew about as between FR 5000 and RS 5000.
That's correct.
The only difference, I think, is that unlike FR 5000, RS 5000 had passed, or purportedly passed, a BS 8414 test.
That's correct.
I mean, to put it another way round, actually, this same insulation board, which you'd called FR 5000, has been subjected to that test and then renamed RS 5000 so as to be able to get into the above 18 metre market.
That's correct.
Now, I want to ask you some questions about your involvement in the 18 metre project. In your statement, I don't think we need to see it, it's paragraph 26 at page 9. You say that Jonathan Roper was given the task of the development of a product that could be used above 18 metres. If you want to look at it, we can certainly do that. Page 9, paragraph 26. Let's have that on the screen. You say, JR was a product manager within the marketing team. In late 2012, early 2013, he was tasked with the development of a product that could be sold in the above 18 metre market, RS 5000, as well as a portfolio of other products and the management of how these products would be presented to the market.
Yes.
Do you remember who gave him that task?
I believe he would have been set that task by his manager, who was Paul Evans.
And paragraph 22, if you go, well, actually you can see it here. You say, JR was young at the time and had only been employed by Celetex for around 2 years. He had joined straight from university before he was tasked with this role and therefore had limited experience. Did it occur to you to ask the question of anybody why it was that somebody so young and so inexperienced was being given this task, given the importance of the task?
No, I didn't.
Did it occur to you, did it cross your own mind? Did you ask yourself, well, I wonder why John Roper's got that job?
I think he was the only person who could have been given that job, because development of products was always managed by the marketing team and by product managers, and I think I understand that he was the only one at that time.
You mean the only one available?
The only one completely, I think. I might be wrong. I apologise if I am, but it may have been that he actually comprised the entirety of product managers at Celetex.
I'm not quite sure I understand that. You say
I beg your pardon.
He actually comprised the entirety of product managers. Do you mean he was the only person?
He was the only person who bore the job title product manager.
I follow.
Sorry.
Which I think he got as soon as he joined. Is that right?
No, I think that John was promoted to be a product manager. I think when he joined, I think I say that he had a mainly administrative role, and I believe that was about taking sales data that he was given and putting it into a spreadsheet for use by his manager.
Yes. In fact, I think he was assistant product manager at first. He had that title. But turning to Mr. Evans, can I just show you paragraph 22 of your statement while we've got it on the screen, or got that document at least on the screen at page 8, at the bottom of page 7, on the top of page 8. At page 7, paragraph 22, you say that, in the third line, PE, that's Paul Evans, was young when he joined Celetex and worked under CK, that's Chris King.
Yeah.
CK had a certain way of working that I would describe as aggressive and he had a reputation for taking shortcuts. PE had no construction experience, and as far as I was aware, he picked up everything he knew from CK. When you say that there, do you mean that he picked up everything he knew about Celetex and the insulation business from Chris King?
Yes, I would.
Are you implying as well that he shared the traits that you have described that Mr. King had?
I don't think he shared the personality traits of Chris King, but I think in terms of how he would have approached his work in terms of managing his department and setting its goals, undertaking its tasks, I think he would have got that from Chris King. But they were different people in terms of their personality.
In the way in which Mr. Evans approached his work, would you describe him as aggressive and...
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean it as aggressive. So, no, I don't mean his aggressive personality. I don't think he got that from Chris King, and he wasn't...
No, leave aside his personality, but his style of management, was that aggressive? Punchy?
No, I don't think so. I'm just trying to explain myself clearly. I guess in the way that projects were run at Celetex to bring new products to market, I think he would have taken that from Chris King, as in things should be done quickly. The most important things are having a product which is saleable to the market, for example, which I think were things that he would have got from Chris King. I don't think in terms of his personal style, which is to be aggressive, I don't think he took that from Chris King.
No, I understand. And you go on to say of Mr. Evans, in the last sentence there, effectively he was promoted to marketing director without a lot of experience, and in practice was able to make decisions within Celetex without any real checks or balances. Was that a concern to you at the time?
No, it wasn't.
And if we go then to paragraph 26, again at page 9, we come back to where we were before. You say there, after the reference to JR, in the last sentence, JR reported directly to the head of marketing PE, who in turn reported to CC, that's Craig Chambers. It was therefore my understanding that Paul Evans and Craig Chambers oversaw or agreed to all final decisions that were made with respect to RS 5000. What was that understanding based on?
I think that understanding is based upon the fact that I helped John with certain tasks on the 18-metre project, and I was involved with and witnessed conversations between all of those individuals with regards to the 18-metre project. And from the things that I saw and the recollections that I have, I don't think that John would have had any autonomous decision-making with respect to that project, and that he would have had to run everything past Paul. I know that Craig was closely following that project, which was a view that I formed from conversations I witnessed, and also from my conversations with John. And my understanding was that John wouldn't have been given any decision-making power, and he would not have been able to autonomously make any decision with any important decision, I would say, with regards to RS 5000 or the project to develop it.
Yes, now thank you. Now, sticking on this page, if you look a little bit lower down the page to paragraph 28, Mr. Hayes, you'll see there in the last 3 lines you say, JR's responsibility, do you see? JR's responsibility for developing RS 5000 was therefore a significant responsibility, given that Celetex's ability to meet Saint-Gobain's targets seemed to be heavily reliant on the success or failure of this product. Were you surprised that Mr. Roper was given the task of developing it, given his relative inexperience and youth?
No, I don't recall thinking that at the time.
Right. Did you ask yourself at the time whether or not he was tasked with doing what you say there because he was inexperienced and was therefore less likely to challenge the decision making?
That is not something that I would have thought at the time.
Right. If you go to paragraph 32 of your statement, at page 11, 2 pages on, please, you say in the second sentence that the drive behind you say the last line there was significant pressure on JR from PE at the top of the business to develop the product and to do so quickly. What made you think that?
So there were, I guess, a number of things that I witnessed which would inform that. I gave an example a moment ago about the length of time between the first and the second test. So that was one example. The conversations that I witnessed about how they needed a product which could be considered to be a new product in order to meet the budget in terms of certain amounts of profit coming from things which were considered to be new products. And I don't think, to my knowledge, that there were other projects running at the time which would have allowed to have meet that target with different products, for example. So it was kind of RS5000, it has to be this product which is going to help us to achieve that goal. And also just the level of interest that I saw. So an example would be the 18-metre update meeting, which I suspect we'll come to, where Craig Chambers was at that meeting, and he was, very interested in that product, in that project, I beg your pardon, and very involved in the discussions at that meeting, and that showed to me, because Craig was the managing director, that it was very important to the business.
Yes. It's right, I think, that in early 2013, Jonathan Roper approached you and asked for your help in developing RS5000, or what was to become RS5000. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. And although I think you say you weren't the most knowledgeable or longest-serving member of the team, presumably by that stage you had sufficient knowledge of the FR product, FR5000, to be able to help him in the development of RS5000. Is that correct?
Yes, so I think that, yes, that is correct.
Yes. And you say your paragraph 29 of your statement on page 10, if we can go back a page, you say, my involvement in the development of RS5000 was in my capacity as a TSO. Does that mean that you had more technical expertise than Mr. Roper?
I think in some areas, yes, that's fair.
What areas?
So obviously I had been in the business longer than John, and my role had been in the technical department. So in areas such as the thermal performance of our products, their practical application in certain constructions, and the fact that I was able to do thermal calculations for our products, I think would all have been things where I had a greater level of knowledge than John did. I think that in terms of the fire performance of our products and in terms of fire testing of our products, I had never been involved in a project to develop a product before. I'd never been involved in fire testing, and my knowledge about the regulations to do with 18 metres were really solely based upon the technical bulletin, which we looked at earlier, which said that, effectively, we don't have a product for this this market. So I think it's fair to say that in many areas, my knowledge about our products and their application would have been greater than John's. But in terms of, fire performance, fire testing, for example, I think we would have been starting off pretty much at the same place, which is at the beginning of the road.
Yes. Now, we've seen earlier your October 2010 training document. I showed you some of that before. Mm-hmm. We might be able to take this a little bit more quickly. Can we take it that the information set out in that training document was still in your mind and known to you when you became involved in early 2013 with Mr. Raper on the development of RS 5000?
I'm not sure I would say it was at front of my mind. I obviously had the level of knowledge which is outlined in that document.
Yes.
It wasn't knowledge that we put to use every day because a lot of the inquiries which we received were to do with low-rise buildings, which is to say houses, and so queries regarding above 18 metres were relatively rare, although they did come through with a degree of regularity.
Yes. Were you familiar, let's see if I can take this a little bit more shortly, you've told us that you were familiar with the fact that there was a distinction between Class 0 on the one hand and the concept of limited combustibility on the other. You knew that.
Yes.
You were familiar enough with the building regulations, and particularly approved document B, to know that there was an alternative route to compliance if you were going to apply insulation above 18 metres, namely a BS 8414 test in accordance with what was in early 2013 BR 135 edition 2 from 2003.
Yes.
Yes. And you were familiar, I think, with the requirements of BR 135, were you? Namely that you knew that if you did a test under BS 8414, it was a full system test.
Yes, and I think that would have, even if that wasn't front of my mind, I think we quickly understood that in terms of the project as well.
Yes. And did you know or come to understand it that under BR 135, the test that you did under BS 8414 in order to satisfy the BR 135 criteria would only apply to the system as tested?
Yes.
Yes. And did you understand that the fire performance of the complete external cladding system was of critical importance?
That's something that would become apparent during the course of the project.
At what point did that become apparent to you?
So our knowledge increased as we went through the project, but an example which, again, I'm sure that we would come to would be we had a meeting with a company called Celetex, and they talked to us about some testing that they had undertaken with Kingspan.
I see. So the meetings in June and October 2013 with Celetex, the Eggingtons.
I think that I was only at one of those meetings.
Yes, we'll come to that. But I think in general terms, I think you accept that certainly at latest during the course of 2013, you came to learn that fire performance of the complete external cladding system as a system was of critical importance if you were going to do an 8414 test.
Yes.
Yes. Now, can we go to paragraph 13 of your statement, please, on page 30? I'm so sorry, page 13 of your statement, paragraph 39. You say there, our basic understanding at this point was that in order to be compliant under the relevant building regulations for a building above 18 metres, it was possible to either use materials of limited combustibility defined within the regulations for all elements of the cladding system. This ruled out PIR and phenolic foam, or successfully complete the test. Kingspan had therefore taken the latter option and passed the test. It was decided we would also undertake the test, and so we began seeking help with the components of our test rig. Does that accurately and fully set out your understanding of the technical options facing Celetex in launching RS 5000?
Yes.
So putting it simply, you had to pass the BS 8414 test and meet the BR 135 criteria in relation to the system that you tested?
Yes.
Yes. And from what you knew at the time, did you think that others working with you on the RS 5000 launch were aware of what you set out there?
Yes.
And then can we look at BR 135 finally on this, just to get the absolute words in front of you and to get you to confirm them? This is at CEL 50584, please. This is a copy of the third edition of BR 135, which was published in the January of 2013. And we've seen from earlier evidence from Mr. Roper that he became aware of it within Celetex not long afterwards, but during, I think, the May of that year. Did you become aware of this edition at about that time as well, do you think?
Yes, I think that within Celetex, or given to us, I'm not sure who, possibly by Rob, there was a copy of the second edition, and I think we came into a possession of the third edition. I think possibly it might have been purchased for the sake of the project.
Right. And if you look at page 33 in this document, this is within Appendix B, Annex B, as you can see from the top right-hand side of the document. And Annex B is about the performance criteria and classification for BS 8414 Part 2. I've dived straight into the middle of the annex. But if you look at that page, you can see on the right-hand side, there are 3 bullet points. And underneath the bullet points, it says, the classification applies only to the system as tested and detailed in the classification report. The classification report can only cover the details of the system as tested. It cannot state what is not covered. When specifying or checking a system, it is important to check that the classification documents cover the end-use application. Can we take it, Mr. Hayes, that from the time you read this document in the first part of 2013, you were fully aware to those principles set out there?
Yes, I'm not sure if my understanding came from reading this document or whether it was a combination of things that we were learning on the project, but I came to understand that the test was a test of the system that was on the rig on that day and only covered what was tested and did not cover other things.
And so far as you could observe from those around you working on the RS 5000 project, did they also know and understand the principles, if not the exact wording,
Yes.
as set out in Annex B there?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment? It's, I think, a convenient moment in the questions.
Yes, very well. We have a break during the morning and the afternoon, Mr. Hayes, and this is a convenient time to take a short break this morning. So we're going to stop now. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please.
Thank you.
All right. And I have to ask you, while you're out of the room, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, would you go with the usher then, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. 25 to 12, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Hayes to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Hayes, ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Willett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Now, Mr. Hayes, am I right in thinking that you were the only TSO at Celetex involved in the testing of RS5000?
That's correct.
Now, in terms of individuals, Rob Warren was also involved, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
To what extent was he involved in the testing, either in the design or the carrying out of the testing?
So Rob Warren was head of technical. So as well as managing our department, he was basically the highest or most senior person technically within Celetex. So it might be helpful just to clarify that Paul and Rob and John were physically in very close proximity to each other. So possibly even John and Paul sharing an office, or their offices being essentially right next to each other. And so I think that it was very common for them to talk often, to share information. And I think that Paul and John would have leaned on Rob quite a bit for input. And he would have been involved in many discussions around the project. Rob was present at key meetings, such as the 18-metre update meeting, which we may come to. I believe that Rob was present at both tests. He was certainly present at the first test that I was also present at. Rob was at the introduction training, which was delivered by John and Rob to the Celotex Technical Centre team on the introduction of RS5000. And I think that Rob would also have been present, although I have to say I'm not sure whether this is the case, but it would be normal for him to be present at national sales conferences where new products are launched. And so he may well have been at that event as well.
Can we go to page 12 of your statement, please, and look at paragraph 36? You say there, our initial considerations focused on figuring out what the rules and regulations were with respect to insulation for buildings above 18 metres and where we could find this information. And then later on in that paragraph, you say, we knew we wanted to compete with Kingspan's K15, and then you go on to say the starting point was Kingspan's literature. They had a publicly accessible data sheet and a BBA certificate for their K15 product, as well as some literature on their website. We relied on no more than 10 relevant documents to provide this key information, and you give some examples. So, do we take it from that although you had come to the project with the knowledge that we discussed just before the break about BR135 and the BS8414 testing in general terms, your further researches took you to the Kingspan marketing literature?
Yes, that's correct.
Now let's look at these documents, or some of them. First, please, CEL 408509. This is a Kingspan technical bulletin, as you can see from the top left-hand corner and top right-hand corner, third issue, September 2010. Is this one of the documents that you looked at as part of your initial researches?
Yeah, I believe so.
And it's called Insulation for Ventilated Rain Screen Cladding Systems, Compliance with Approved Document B2. And if you look at page 3 on that document, you can see that there is section 12.5 of ADB, which I think you were familiar with anyway. Is that right?
Yes, we're familiar with that information from the technical bulletin number 26, which then formed the basis for the document that I had produced, which I think gave this information.
And if you go to page 4, at the top, it says Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board is the first insulation board to achieve LABC type of approval as a thermal insulation layer in a rain screen cladding systems. It remains the only insulation board that holds both BBA certification and LABC type approval. Was that statement there a factor in the decision that Celetex took later to obtain LABC registered details for RS 5000?
I think that the fact that Kingspan had those accreditations would have informed Celetex's decision to get LABC approval.
Yeah. Now, someone has written expired, and then underneath that K15 week. I think that's what it says. Do you know whether those scribbles were on the document that you looked at, or whether somebody within Celetex added those?
That looks like my handwriting,
Right.
And I wonder, looking at this document and the fact that it looks to be a scan or photocopy type document, I wonder if this version of it has actually been taken off my desk, possibly.
Right. Do you know what you meant by expired K15 week?
They might be separate notes, so it might be that expired is one note, and that possibly refers to LABC, although I don't remember why I wrote that now, and then K15 week might be a different note and refer to something different. But I don't remember now why I wrote that K15 week or what that means.
Right. And then you can see a little bit lower down, just to finish this page off, it refers in the third paragraph down to the LABC type approval. Thus, it says, eases the planning process for projects incorporating Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board and applies in all situations shown on diagram 40 of approved document B, volume 2, including those parts of a building more than 18 metres above ground, figure 5. And there, in figure 5, is diagram 40 of approved document B, provisions for external surfaces or walls, which on the right-hand side there refers to class 0 as being the classification for fire for the requirement of external wall surfaces. When you looked at that, did you ask yourself what the relevance of K15 having a class 0 was, by reference in particular to diagram 40 as they've set out on the page there?
No, I don't believe that I did. I remember when I first saw diagram 40 as being quite confused as to what it actually meant, and whether it was referring to the performance of the cladding or the performance of insulation. But I believe what diagram 40 is talking about is the performance of the cladding rather than the performance of the insulation board. And I would have formed an opinion, I think, at some point, although I'm not exactly sure when, that actually that diagram is not relevant to insulation performance.
Indeed. And as such, did you then begin to question the reliability of Kingspan's marketing material such as this?
I don't remember querying that part of it or feeling that that particular part of it was. I don't remember paying a lot of attention to that particular part of it, although there certainly were parts of Kingspan's literature that we found confusing and not really clear how it matched what we were seeing as inquiries coming into the business.
Can we go to CEL 408510, please? This is Kingspan's data sheet for Cooltherm K15 rain screen board insulation for rain screen cladding systems. And at the top right-hand corner, you'll see that it was the 9th issue, March 2011. See that? Was this also one of the Kingspan documents that you looked at as part of your researches?
Yes, we definitely would have looked at the Cooltherm K15 literature. Whether this was the exact dated version that we saw, I don't specifically recall, but if this is the version which was current at the time, which would have been 2013, then yes, it would have been.
Yes. Let me show you the third bullet point down on the right-hand side. It says, successfully tested to BS 8414 2002 and can meet the criteria within BR 135. And then it says, and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 metres. First, given that the reference to 8414 2002 was a reference to Part 1, did you understand that at that time K15 didn't have a pass at BS 8414 Part 2 2005?
Yes, I believe we became aware of that during the project and as we looked at their documentation. Did you
Also become aware of the fact that notwithstanding that Kingspan had not had a pass at BS 8414 Part 2 2005, nonetheless it was being used on steel frame constructions? Did you know that?
Yes, I think I would have done.
What did that tell you about the way Kingspan was using or not using the tests to sell its Cooltherm K15?
I think initially it told us that they had managed to gain wide market acceptance for their product with lots of different types of constructions. I think not only the variants of the steel frame to masonry, but possibly with lots of different cladding types as well. And they have managed to do that on the basis of, I think the literature only references a single test that they had completed.
Then sticking with the wording, as I've shown you, it says in that bullet point, can meet the criteria within BR 135. Now, you told us earlier that at least come the first part of 2013, you had read Annex B of BR 135 and understood that BR 135, the criteria there only apply to the system as tested. Was that so when you looked at this document?
Yes, I think we would have had that awareness as we reviewed this document.
Yes. And then when you go on to see the words that follow it, and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 metres, the therefore, did you think that that meant that Kingspan was saying that K15 could be used in any system, or were they saying only in a system exactly the same as the system tested?
I think, and it's difficult to say exactly when you formed a view, because I've obviously have looked at these documents many times from the beginning of our RS5000 project as I sit here today, and so it's sometimes difficult to say what was in my mind at that time, but I believe we would have formed a view that this was a piece of clever marketing and that they were trying to imply that their product could be used with a wide variety of different constructions.
Even though
that was not, strictly speaking, correct.
Right. When you say clever marketing, let me just press you just a little. Did it occur to you at the time when you read this that the statement, and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 metres, was misleading?
I think at the time we would have wondered how they were able to do it, and possibly we might have thought is there a trick that we've missed? So, for example, did they have an engineering report or a technical judgment which might have meant that they were able to show that they could be used with other systems? Maybe they had some testing that they hadn't referenced on their literature. Right. So I think certainly initially it was, how are they able to do it? So I don't think would have necessarily formed the opinion at the very beginning, Kingspan are doing something wrong, there's something rotten here. I think it would have been how, and how are they doing it would have been the question to start with.
Did you note, when you read that there is no caveat or disclaimer here that K15 can only be used in the same system as that tested?
I think, to be fair, I probably would read the whole document and see whether that has been placed into context somewhere else. So I can't immediately recall what's on the other pages of this document, but perhaps that they have included a caveat somewhere else. But I would agree that if you look at that statement in and of itself, that is misleading.
Yeah. Well, let's look a little bit lower down, page 6, just to make sure that we don't only take a partial look at the document. Go to page 6, right-hand side, under the heading Fire Performance. You can see there's a reference to Class 0 at the top, and then it says, halfway down underneath the test, Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in the construction specified in the table below when subjected to the British Standard Fire Test BS 8414 Part of 2002, Fire Performance of External Cladding Systems, Test Methods for Non-Load Bearing External Cladding Systems applied to the face of a building, has achieved the results shown below. And it sets out the construction and the result. And it says the tested product, under result, meets the criteria stated within BRE 135, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 metres in accordance with the building regulations / standards. Did you read that?
Yes, I'm sure that we would have done.
Did that strike you at the time as a disclaimer or caveat?
I think they're trying to strongly imply that you could use that in multiple constructions, but it sort of doesn't make logical sense, because on the left-hand column they've provided details of a system that passes, but on the right-hand side they are, I think, strongly implying that because of that test you can use it in any building above 18 metres.
And was that a thought you had at the time when you looked at this document as part of your initial researches?
I think we would have come to that conclusion at some point, but as I said, I think initially when we looked at it, I think the thought would have been, how have they done it? Is there something that's not clear? Have they got, something up their sleeve, I guess, which would allow them to make that statement? Yes.
Now, looking a little bit later in the year, 2013, can we go to CEL 403008? Well, I'd like to go to page 2 in that, please, first of all. And about a third of the way down the second page there, you can see that there is an email sent on the 18th of October. You can see that, from Jonathan Roper to you, Kingspan CTC Inquiry. And Jonathan Roper, I think, says, anything I've missed, and then there's set out purpose to gain further information on what recommendations Kingspan are giving in regards to use of K15 in buildings above 18 metres. And then underneath it, it says project, first project of this scale, student accom / commercial, METSEC frame, cement particle gourd, envelope, NV1 bracket systems with Trespa Meteon 2mm rib panels, rivet fixed. Objectives, is K15 applicable with all cladding systems, 2mm or 3mm aluminium panels, Trespa, Marley, etc. As their BBA certificate states, the test used a cementitious board as the overcladding. And then there are further objectives and questions set out underneath that. And the third one you can see is which particular system was tested to BR135 and what assurances can they give that it covers all cladding systems. Was this exercise one which was part of a mystery shopper exercise to try to find out more about K15?
I believe that's exactly what it was.
Right, and if we scroll up, I think we can then see how this turns out. You go back to Jamie Hayes on the 18th of October, bottom of page 1, top of page 2. And then on page 1, if we just go up to that, Jonathan Roper sends an email to Debbie Berger, 18th of October 2013, copy to you. Hi Debbie, if you are still happy to carry out the mystery caller scenario on Kingspan, could the three of us get together early afternoon today, see the brief below, etc. Now we've seen the first bullet point and the third bullet point, questions. Is it right that by this stage you and Mr. Roper were aware that the BR135 certification only covered the tested configuration and components? I think that's right, isn't it, looking at the BR135 Annex B earlier?
I think that is correct, yes.
Yes. And what prompted you to ask these two questions about the breadth of the application of K15?
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about when we could see how Kingspan were marketing their material and confusion within Celetex of how they had able to be widely accepted, and just trying to find out some more information about how they were able to do that, about what they were telling customers and how they would answer inquiries to potential customers.
Right. So the idea was to pose as a potential customer with a student accommodation type of building and ask those questions and see what they said.
Yeah, and I think a key part of it was to try and get them to send us a copy of their test report.
Right. Now, the email at the top of this thread on page 1 suggests that Debbie Berger may have carried out the mystery shopper exercise. Do you know whether she did?
She did.
She did. Do you know what the results were?
Yes, I think that it was undertaken in the same room with me and John, and that Debbie was on the phone and we were listening in, although I don't think we had the technical capability to listen to both sides.
Right.
So it may have been that we were just listening to Debbie's half of it.
I see.
But I'm sure she would have fed back what had happened in the conversation when the conversation finished.
Well, you say you're sure she would have done. Did she?
Yes, she did.
What did she say?
But in fact, we could hear ourselves how the conversation was progressing, and I believe that when she spoke to an operative of the Kingspan Technical Centre, that they told her explicitly that Kingspan was suitable for her project. And I believe that she then said, "Brilliant, can you please send me a copy of your test report?" And then my understanding is that the person that she was speaking to became quite nervous, backed down and said, oh no, we can't do that. And in fact, what you'll need to do is submit your full inquiry to us in writing, and I'm not able to help you any further on the telephone.
Did you submit a request in writing, or did Debbie Berger, do you think?
No.
You didn't? You just stopped at that point?
Yes, because I think we realised it was not going to be possible to push that any further.
Right. Why did you think that it wasn't going to be possible to obtain Kingspan's test report?
I think we had formed a view that that would be very closely guarded. And I think that was entirely unusual for information to come into the business from Celetex's partners. So it might be that a distributor that we had a relationship with, or maybe another, or a specifier that we had a relationship with, would perhaps give us documents that they had got from other companies that you wouldn't be able to ask for directly. And I think from the fact that we hadn't ever heard of anybody having seen their test report. I think we formed a view that they were very careful not to release it to anybody or to allow it to be seen by the open market.
Yes. I mean, after all, that was, it seems, the same practice that Celetex followed, not to let test reports out.
That's absolutely correct.
Right. So did it play in your thinking that because Celetex were also similarly very guarded about their own test reports, they wouldn't expect Kingspan to be any different?
I'm not sure that I formed that view, because I think the kind of test reports that we would have had previously wouldn't have been so relevant. So they would be things like a Class 0 test report, and I'm not sure how that would be relevant to a customer, or that we had very often been asked for those.
Right. Can we then turn to meetings that you had with IFC and SOTEC? We referred to SOTEC earlier on in your evidence.
Yes.
Can we go to your statement at page 13, please, and look at paragraph 39? We've looked at this before, I think, but you confirmed that, and you say there that once you'd understood that the options were either to use materials of limited combustibility or B, successfully test to BS 8414, and I'm summarising there, you say it was decided, if you look in the last sentence, it was decided we would also undertake the test, and so we began seeking help with the components of our test rig. Do you remember when the decision was made to seek help with components of the test rig for the test?
I don't know. So my role on the project was to help John really with tasks as and when I was asked to do so. So my work on the project represented a fraction of a percentage of my time, which was spent primarily doing my day-to-day work, which is answering customer inquiries. So I think John would have arranged this meeting, have asked me to go with him. I would have got permission to do that from my line manager, which would have been Rob Warren, and I would have attended the meeting with him.
And who was it who made the decision to undertake the test?
I think the decision would have been made by, primarily by Paul Evans and Craig Chambers.
Did you yourself have a discussion with Craig Chambers about undertaking the test?
No, but I was present at a meeting that Craig was at, which was the 18-metre update. And actually, I think perhaps that meeting was when a decision perhaps was made to undertake the test.
Right. When you refer to the 18-metre update meeting, was that a meeting on the 4th of November 2013, for which Mr. Roper produced some slides?
Yes.
Right. We may come to that later on, but can I just ask you, in light of the decision to undertake the test, about some of the meetings with IFC and SOTEC, if we can go to paragraph 40, the next paragraph of your statement, you say, in or around May, June 2013, JR arranged a couple of meetings at the IFC, and I went along with him on at least one occasion. We met a person called Peter and a lady whose name I cannot now recall. The lady would later come along to the first BRE test with us. Just pausing there, was that Peter Jackman?
Yes, it was.
And the lady, was that Dr. Parina Patel?
Yes, and actually since I submitted this statement, I found a business card for that lady, and her name was Parina Patel.
Right. If we go to CEL 3010340, this is an email run at the end of May 2013, and if you look at the second email down on that page, this is an email from Jonathan Roper to you, 28th of May 2013. Jamie, Peter at IFC has asked if we can make a 2 p.m. appointment next Monday to discuss above 18 metres. And then if you look at your response to him at the top of page 1, you go back to him the next day and say, it's okay with me, John, how long is the journey? Now, it looks as if the meeting had been fixed for the 3rd of June 2013, which was the next Monday. There is a meeting later on the 22nd of June 2013, for which we have notes, but we don't have any notes of any meeting early in June 2013. Did the meeting take place, do you think?
Wow. I was at one meeting, I believe, at IFC's offices, but I can't actually remember the date that was.
I think there was October, in fact.
Okay.
We'll come to the note of that in a moment. But you don't recall meeting in June at all, meeting IFC in June at all?
I may be getting the two different ones confused.
Right.
I remember one meeting, but I don't remember the date of it. But I think I say in my statement that I may have been at more than one meeting.
Right. Maybe we can disentangle this a little bit. It seems that there was a meeting in October 2013. Let me just show you the note of that, because it's a meeting at which Celetex were also present. CEL 30 is 11052. And we can see that this is a meeting on the 3rd of October 2013 to discuss above 18 metres fire test. And you can see that at that meeting, John Egginton from Celetex was there and David Cooper from IFC was there, but not Peter Jackman or Parina Patel. But you were there at that meeting.
So I think that was a meeting with IFC, and that was at their offices,
right,
which I attended. And I think that in this meeting, where we're at Celetex, and David Cooper has driven to meet us at that meeting.
Fine. So you met IFC people twice, but you had one meeting with the IFC at their offices.
Yes.
Right. So we'll come back to that. We'll take that off the screen and go to paragraph 41 of your statement, if we can, please. Also on page 13, as you can see in front of you. And you say there, from our meeting with the IFC, we established that a field of application report, FOAR, involves an expert's opinion that a product was acceptable for use in a way similar and not identical to the way tested in the test rig. Now, as far as you recall it, is this right, that it was the IFC who told you that a field of application report was possible?
Yes. We met with Peter and Parina and possibly another member of their team. Peter gave the impression of being extremely experienced. He was a character and he was not shy in putting forward that he was a heavy hitter, and he talked about how he had effectively, in his memory, had drafted the Hong Kong fire regulations, and yes, they gave the strong impression that it might be possible to use an 8414 test, and from that test produce a field of applications report, which would allow some components of that rig to then be varied.
Did Mr. Jackman or Dr. Patel identify any official guidance or industry practice which allowed a field of application report to be used in conjunction with a BS 8414 test result?
Not that I remember. They may have referenced some standards which I don't now recall.
Right. Now, just to go back then to the meeting on the 3rd of October, the note of which I have just shown you, you deal with that at paragraphs 42 and 43 of your statement over the page 14, and you set out your recollection of that. We can look at the note of the meeting. It's, as I say, it's CEL 30111052, which is what we just looked at a moment ago, and I'd like to go back to with you. And it says, and this is, we think, John Roper's note. Can you confirm that?
I actually believe that I wrote this.
You thought you wrote this? Okay.
Yes.
Under fire test, very problematic to pass. Kingspan failed twice with standard cavity barriers. Nick, just on that, do you remember who said that?
Yes, that would have been John from Celotex.
Right. And then third bullet point down, still no idea how Kingspan support the use of decorative cladding as their fire test uses a non-combustible cladding. Do you remember who said that?
I think that is that note is intended to show, I think, a view that was formed by the people at that meeting together, as opposed to one person saying that.
So that was a joint no idea.
Yes.
Right. And the reference to combustible decorative cladding, as you can see in that third bullet point, is also referred to in the second bullet point. John at Celetex, sceptical about pass with decorative cladding. What did you understand by the phrase decorative cladding?
Well, as I look at that today, I'm not sure I remember exactly what is meant by that. I think that it is either a reference to any cladding which is a normal cladding panel, and by a normal cladding panel, I mean something that you could actually was put to market to be a cladding panel of a building, as opposed to the cement board that Kingspan had used. But it might also refer to, because I think, and I might not have remembered this correctly, but I think that Celotex specialised in certain types of cladding, and I think that they did aluminium cladding and high pressure laminates, and so it may have been when when John is talking about decorative cladding, he's thinking the types of cladding that he uses, which is to say aluminium and high pressure laminates, and might not, for example, include things like fibre cement panels, which I don't think John ever got involved in.
Right. Were you aware that Celotex had previously met John Roper in June 2013 and told him that they had attempted to test to BS 8414 Part 2 using Kingspan K15 and had failed?
No, I was not aware of that, but I think that the same conversation happened at this meeting, and John, or not the same conversation, but John did reference testing with Kingspan and failing during this meeting.
Right. Were you given any details about the failed Kingspan tests?
Yes.
What did they say?
Well, I got the impression that he wasn't supposed to talk about it because he had possibly been under a non-disclosure agreement, but he made his own decision that he would do so anyway, and he described them as failing quite badly, and I think he made the comment that one of them had failed so badly that there had been concerns from the BRE that it was going to set the roof of the burn hall on fire.
Right. And indeed, at paragraph 42, you do say that Celotex told you that K15 had failed badly using aluminium cladding. And that's not in your note. Why is it not in your note?
I'm not sure. I think in the first paragraph I've got very problematic to pass. Kingspan failed twice with standard cavity barriers. Perhaps I felt that covered that, or perhaps I was trying to be more formal, perhaps, in terms of how this document is laid out, rather than being anecdotal, I suppose. Or
Right. Can we just look at paragraph 42? You say in the last part of that paragraph, 3 lines up from the end, that John Eggington from Celotex informed us that Celotex had undertaken a test with Kingspan, which had failed badly using aluminium cladding, and following that, Celotex had no further involvement with the testing of Kingspan products. So, although it's not in your note, you're confirming, are you here today, that that was the subject of discussion at that meeting?
Yes.
No, it's not in your note.
no, that's correct.
So can we take it from that meeting that you were aware, as a result, that aluminium rain screen panels would not likely have passed with RS 5000 either?
Yes.
Now, do you remember whether there was any discussion of ACM panels, aluminium composite material panels, at that meeting?
I think at that time, I don't think I would have necessarily understood what ACM was or what the difference between ACM and aluminium was. So I understand now that there are differences between solid aluminium and aluminium composite materials. I understand that there are differences between aluminium composite materials, but I don't recall that I understood that well at the time that I wrote that note.
Had you not come across ACM panels in the course of your, by then, 8 years at, 9 years at Celetex?
I'm sure that I would have come across them. So just to try and expand upon that a bit, many of the inquiries that we received into Celetex were for low-rise buildings, so rain screen inquiries would have been a lot rarer. But also the major part of our job in technical was to perform U-value calculations for people. And when you do a U-value calculation for a rain screen cladding application, it doesn't matter what the actual rain screen panel is.
I follow. Going back to the note, if we can, at CEL 30's11052, you can see in the first bullet point it says very unlikely to pass. Was that your view or something that was said at the meeting, just to be clear?
I think that is a record of a consensus which was formed at that meeting.
Right. I mean, did John Egginton or David Cooper say you, Celetex, are very unlikely to get what became RS 5000 to pass a BS 8414 test?
I don't remember that explicitly. My impression was, and I have to be careful because I've seen a lot of evidence and documents, but I think I'm correct in saying that the impression that I had at the time was that John didn't like Kingspan very much. He didn't like them as people. He didn't like their product. He liked mineral wool, and that he, I think, equated PIR and phenolic foam being quite. He saw them in the same way, I think. So I think that he would have had the view that if Kingspan haven't passed, you are not going to pass.
Looking at the fourth bullet point, it says very unlikely to pass on the basis that Celetex FR 5000 is slightly better than phenolic, according to IFC testing. Can you just explain what that means?
I think that goes back to the meeting that we had with IFC, and they had expressed a view to us that they felt that FR 5000 might have a slightly better performance than phenolic foam in terms of fire, and therefore you might be able to do slightly more with it in terms of passing a test than you would be able to do with phenolic foam.
Right. I'd just like to try to understand the sentence, very unlikely to pass, on the basis that Celetex FR 5000 is slightly better than phenolic. Why would it be very unlikely to pass if FR 5000 was better than phenolic?
Because I guess because you'd need to be not just a little bit better than Kingspan, you'd have to be a lot better. And that perhaps small variances between PIR and phenolic are not going to be enough to overcome the fact that Kingspan seems to have failed quite badly.
Still doesn't quite explain the words in the sentence, on the basis that Celetex FR 5000 is slightly better than phenolic. If Celetex FR 5000 was better than phenolic, wouldn't that mean that it was more likely to pass than Kingspan?
Yes, it would.
And it doesn't say that, though.
No, it doesn't.
So can you explain?
so let's say that Kingspan has failed quite badly in that test. You have a product which is slightly better, and that is still going to be quite unlikely to pass.
I see. Because
you'd have to be a whole lot better.
Right, I see. So does that mean that Kingspan was very problematic, RS 5000 as it became was still problematic, still very unlikely to pass, but only marginally more likely?
Yes, with the types of cladding that John is familiar with, which I think would have been aluminium and high-pressure laminates.
And that failure, potential for failure, was that in all cases or only with a metal panel? Or decorative cladding, perhaps?
I don't really remember, but I think I got the impression that they had done the same test twice. So they hadn't done one test and said, let's change some stuff around. They had done the first one test and then had another crack at it.
You can see in the 5th bullet point down, it says, possible idea to design, quotes, double cavity fire barrier, close quotes. Who said that at the meeting?
I think it was an idea which was put forward to us by John at Celetex.
Right. And would that be an unusual feature in a construction, in your experience as it stood at the time?
No, I don't think so. I think at that point in time, we didn't really understand what were the parameters that would make a test more or less likely to pass. So when John came up with the idea of having a double cavity fire barrier, I thought we probably thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Maybe we can take that away and have a think about that.
Right. Did he say that he had used one?
No, I think he was spitballing. I don't think.
Spitballing?
Can you
just explain what that means?
Yes, sorry. I think he was just sitting there and giving ideas off the top of his head. I wasn't aware that he was saying there is this product in the market that you could use. I think he was saying you could kind of make that yourself, if that makes sense, by using two products which are commonly available and combining them into one.
Right. Okay. Was that something you had thought of yourself before, or
no?
Was this news to you? Right.
In fact, our knowledge of fire barriers, I think, as we stood there at that meeting, was virtually zero.
Right. But he was the one who came up with this idea of the double cavity fire barrier as a possibility.
Yes, but what he meant there was a metal tray with a mineral wool on top, and that is a completely different concept from what would later become the fire barrier with the missing material.
I follow. Can you go to page 2 in this document, please? And at the top of that page, you see there in the first bullet point, it says, on the basis that the fire test is going to be a close call, if we can even pass it, I think we cannot rely on the field of applications report allowing a breathable membrane over the face of the insulation. Does that bullet point record your own thoughts or something that was said during the meeting by somebody or anybody else?
Yes, this is to do with positioning of breathable membranes. So in our literature for rain screen cladding, and there was literature for rain screen cladding because it was used or was suitable for use on low-rise buildings, Celetex showed that a breathable membrane would be positioned on the outside face of the insulation, which means that in a fire event, the flame would hit the breathable membrane before it hit the insulation.
Right.
And Kingspan had always shown the breathable membrane behind the insulation, where it's hidden away between the insulation and the sheathing board. And my thought here was, we need to think about this, because actually, if we have the breathable membrane in the position where it has always historically been required to be for Celetex, isn't that going to cause a problem? And my thought there is that the field of because I don't think it would be common to put the breathable membrane in the test itself. So I'm trying to raise the thought there about that. I don't think that a field of applications report, such as might be produced by IFC, is going to allow you to, or account for the fact that you have this breathable membrane over the front face of the insulation. It wasn't a concern that anybody else was really interested in. And what happened in the end was that Celetex changed its position on where the breathable membrane should be and basically said, we're going to pick it up and move it behind the insulation, the same as Kingspan would.
Is it fair to say that the upshot of this meeting was that you came away not particularly optimistic about the prospects of passing a BS 8414 test for RS 5000?
Certainly with the types of cladding that John did,
Right.
which were various types of metal claddings and high-pressure laminates.
And those types of cladding were, is this right, fairly representative of a wide range of cladding panels being used in the market?
Yeah, I don't think at this time, or really much later, I really ever understood what the percentages were of what types of cladding panel would be most commonly used. So let's say that you have 100 buildings. Would 60 of those buildings be ACM and 20 of those buildings be fibre cement and 8 of those buildings be terracotta? Or so I don't think I really understood what percentage of the market those types of cladding panels would be.
Right. Did you have any views at the time about the representative nature of the cladding panel that Kingspan had used in order to pass their 8414 test?
Yes, I think the feeling was that it was completely unrepresentative of any panel which would ever be used in real life.
Right. Can we look at CEL 50615, please? This is a copy of Kingspan's 2008, October 2008 BBA certificate, which has been disclosed to the inquiry by Celetex. Was it in Celetex's possession because you had considered this document as part of your research, do you think?
I'm sure that it would have been, yes.
Right. Now, let's just look at the first page of it. 3/4 of the way down, you can see behaviour in relation to fire under the heading Key Factors Assessed. And it says the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. The product has been tested to BS 8414 Part 1 2002 for one specific construction on masonry walls, see Section 7. Did you read that, do you think, at the time, when you looked at this?
I'm sure that we would have done, yes.
Yes. And if you look at Part 7, or Section 7, this is on page 5. At the bottom of the page there, it says the following fire tests have been undertaken to BS 8414 Part 1 to 2002 for masonry substrates, and it identifies the build-up there. And in the second line, it says, it refers to the 6 millimetre thick cement particle boards. So when you saw this, you would have realised, would you, that the panels which had been used on the exterior face of the test rig by Kingspan was a 6 millimetre thick cement particle board?
Well, I think there was a bit more confusion than that because I think in the document that we looked at together a short while ago, which was their data sheet, it described the cladding as being a 6 millimetre non-combustible board.
Yes.
And I think our basic understanding at the time was that cement particle boards weren't normally non-combustible. So actually,
right.
It's not just the fact that that's not a normal cladding board. I think there seems to be some inconsistency between the BBA certificate and Kingspan's literature.
Okay, thank you. And while we're on this, if we can just go back a page, you can see under section 7.1, under the heading Behaviour in Relation to Fire, it says the product is classified as Class 0 or low risk, as defined in the documents supporting the national building regulations The product therefore may be used in accordance with the provisions of England and Wales, approved document B, paragraph 8.4, volume 1, and paragraphs 12.5, 12.6, and 12.7, volume 2. See also diagram 40. Did you see that at the time?
I'm sure that we would have done, yes.
Did you ask yourself what the relevance of section 12.7 of ADB was, given that on any view, K15 was never a material of limited combustibility?
Well, I think that approved document B has those paragraphs, and some of the paragraphs talk about it has to be of limited combustibility, and some of those paragraphs talk about that you could use an 8414 test. So I'm not sure, as I sit here, whether paragraphs 12.5, 12.6 and 12.7 are the paragraphs which talk about it being of limited combustibility, or whether they are the paragraphs which talk about it being able to have an 8414 test.
Well, take it from me that paragraph or section 12.7 relates to materials of limited combustibility. That's what it deals with.
Okay.
It sounds to me as if that didn't strike you as, at the time, as a strange reference, given that on any view K15 was never going to be and never was a material of limited combustibility.
I have to say I don't remember, because I'm not sure whether we would have looked at that and said, okay, it's saying that it can comply with approved document B, and formed the view that that was because it had been tested to 8414, or whether we would have actually looked at it in the level of detail where we got out approved document B,
right,
went to those paragraphs and said, okay, what's going on there?
You never did that. I mean, just to be clear, what it's saying is that the product is classified as class 0, and then goes on to say the product may be used in accordance with the provisions of, etc., paragraph 12.7. Did you make the link between the two and ask yourself, how could it be that a BBA certificate could say that because a product was classified as class 0, it therefore satisfied the provisions of paragraph 12.7, which was about limited combustibility?
I think we and I would have known enough to know that that was not correct.
Right. So did you therefore wonder how Kingspan's BBA certificate could be remotely reliable?
I think that we did view it as being unreliable. I think that we were confused as to how they had got generic wording in their BBA certificate to say that it was, or to imply that it was acceptable on, pretty much any, and didn't. I think we were surprised that it didn't contain wording clarifying further that the test would apply to a single tested system, and that it wasn't clearer in that respect. But I'm not sure I would have looked at it and cross-referenced those paragraphs and said, okay, it seems to be getting confused between class 0, which is only to do with cladding panels, and insulation. So I'm not sure I would have formed that view at the time.
Right. Can we look at paragraph 48 of your witness statement at page 16? You say there, the discrepancies and lack of transparency in the record of the cladding used in the Kingspan publications also suggested to our team that they had undertaken and passed the test using one type of board, and latterly referenced the additional use of other types of cladding with their product in their marketing materials. PE, JR and RW collectively wanted to include a panel on the Celetex test rig that could and would be used by the market as it was tested. Did you think at the time that if, in fact, Kingspan had undertaken and passed the test using one type of board and then referenced the additional use of other types of cladding within their product, with their product in their marketing materials, that would have been a legitimate approach?
No, I think there was an awareness amongst those individuals, include myself and the business, that actually that was not a correct approach to take.
So, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Hayes, but did you take the view at the time that Kingspan were using the test that they'd undertaken and then essentially misusing it to market K15 into a wider set of applications than was legitimate.
Yes, that is the view that I formed.
Yes.
I think that is a view that was formed over the course of the project, because we explained earlier how when we were looking at Kingspan's literature, it didn't, that view of they're doing something wrong was not immediately formed. It was, how are they doing this? Do they have extra testing? Have they got field of applications reports and engineers' judgments which allows their product to be used? And I think the view was formed over the course of the project that no, they probably didn't have those things, and therefore they have managed to find some way to get their products accepted without the correct documentation to support it.
Does it come to this, that by the end or towards the end of 2013, you had done enough work to form the view, and tell me if this isn't fair, to form the view that the market into which you wanted to launch what became RS 5000 had been skewed by Kingspan's marketing literature?
Yes.
I want to turn to the design of the February 2014 test, and there's a run-up to this in chronological terms. We discussed earlier, very briefly, the meeting on the 4th of November 2013. Do you remember attending such a meeting with Mr. Roper, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Warren?
Yes, I do.
And we can, just to confirm this, look at the document which convenes that meeting, CEL 403011, please. Just to confirm that that's the invitation to the meeting and the attendees at that meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, we can see that one of the attendees was Craig Chambers. Do you remember whether he was there?
I'm sure that he was.
Do you remember him being there?
I definitely remember him being there.
Right. Let's look at the slides then from the meeting, which Mr. Roper told us that he prepared. CEL 30 is 11199. And I'd like just to scroll gently through the first 8 slides just to set the context and refresh your recollection about what was presented at the meeting. If we can just turn to page 2, you can see there's approved document B and section 12.5. If we turn to page 3, we can see that here's a description of BS 8414 in both of its formats and the principle. If we go to page 4, we can see that here is BR 135, a reference to that, and some very basic data about that, but it says in the first bullet point, a large-scale test. If we go to page 5, we can see the diagram taken from Annex B about high-rise buildings and fire propagation up the exterior. If we can go to page 6, we see ventilated facade market and some figures there. Rigid board market estimated at 5 to 7 million there in the last bullet point. And then in the next slide, page 7, external cladding materials and a long list. And you can see there, the fourth one down is aluminium composite, and underneath that to steel, and then zinc, stone, fibre cement, building boards, carrier boards. The last bullet point there, building boards, carrier boards. So do you actually come across those being used as an external cladding material on a building?
No.
Let's say no. Can you help us as to your understanding about the order in which these cladding materials are set out? Does it go from the most common to the least common? Or is it just random, do you think?
I believe it's probably random.
All right.
But I think John put these together, but
Right.
I'm not aware that it doesn't look to me like there's any kind of order to that.
Right. And then if we look at page 8, slide 8, these are the cladding manufacturers. And then at slide 9, we've got Kingspan K15. And we have 5 bullet points there. Tested to BS 8414 Part 1 onto masonry. Non-combustible substrate required. BBA certificate. LABC approval. Fire barrier testing. And if we go on to slide 14, we can then see 5 options. Did you think that these were alternative routes that you thought Celetex might be able to follow? When I say you, I mean you, plural, at the meeting.
Yes.
Yes. And the first one is worst case scenario with field of application report. What did you understand by worst case scenario?
Well, I think the most likely explanation for that is that worst case means cladding with the worst performance. So you would try to find the worst performing cladding that you might still pass with.
Right. I see. And then use an FOAR with it.
Yes.
I follow. And the second option is system route, limits scope, requires re-education. Was there any discussion at the meeting about what re-education was needed?
So we'll have to be careful because actually I don't remember the meeting that well, but I've seen and heard so many things that I'm just trying to limit myself to what I knew at the time.
Yes,
but
thank you.
I think it refers to going out and telling the market Kingspan are wrong, everything you've been doing is wrong. Actually, you shouldn't have been using those products of all different types of cladding. You should have been using it only exactly as it was tested.
Right. And was there a view taken at the meeting, as best you recall, about whether that was really realistic?
I don't remember that. I'm sure that there would have been conversation around that as it is a talking point on that slide. I have to be careful to try and, what I remember at the time. I would say that if there was conversation, it would be extremely unlikely that any of the people at that meeting, in terms of decision makers, which is Paul or Rob or Craig, would have wanted to go down that route.
And then we have two bullet points, test and launch, with or without BBA and LABC, and then opt out of above 18 metres. Was there any serious discussion at the meeting about whether you should opt out of the 18-metre project?
I don't remember very well. I think that possibly Rob may have given the opinion that Celetex should either launch with a system and say this is the only system in which you can use our products, or we should opt out. But I think that Craig and Paul are keen to move the project forward and to at least proceed to do some testing. I'm not sure if a clear decision was made as to how it would be marketed later. I'm sure there's a reference somewhere to Craig Chambers saying, well, let's get a pass and worry about it later.
Right. So you're sure there's a reference? Is there a
document that I've been seeing, which is where it says something like, Craig is of the opinion that this is not worth worrying about until we have a test pass.
Right. So was the upshot of the meeting? Well, you tell me. What was the upshot of the meeting? What decision was made as a result of this meeting about each of these options?
I'm not sure that a decision was made at that meeting about any of those options. I think a decision was made about what would happen next, which is to say that Celetex would go forward with an 8414 test. And I think there's maybe another slide which is coming where it shows the choices of cladding panels which might be selected. And I think a decision was made that the 8mm fibre cement panel option would be selected.
Right. And indeed, if you go to page 15, slide 15, we can see three choices there. ACM panel with improved barrier system, less than 50%. A2 panel with standard barrier, 80%. Cement particle with standard barrier, 90%. to having shown you that, are you saying that the decision was made that 8mm fibre cement panel option would be selected, and namely option 2, A2
Yes.
panel? Right.
That's correct.
And the 80%, was that the 80% pass chance?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. And is it right that at this stage, Celetex wanted to use a cladding that was representative of what people would actually use in practice?
Yes, that's correct.
In other words, priced reasonably, was aesthetic as possible and not too thick. I think you say that in your statement.
At this point, I think there is a strong view that Celetex don't want to go down the same route as Kingspan, and they want to use a panel which is representative of what people might use,
Right.
and to market that openly.
And you say at paragraph 48 of your statement, if you just go to that, please, at page 16, as we've seen, I think, before, there was a collective desire to use a panel that could and would be used as the market. As it was tested, I've shown you that. Did that include or exclude decorative, what Mr. Egginton described as decorative cladding?
I think that Marley Alternate would be described as decorative cladding. I think it would meet that definition.
Yes.
And I think that when John is talking about decorative cladding, he might be looking at it from his own perspective, which are the materials that he's involved in, which is high pressure laminates and aluminium.
Right.
But I think that the view was formed by Celetex that there were types of decorative cladding, if you like, or representative claddings, which actually could pass an 8414 test.
So is your recollection that you decided to use 8mm Marley Alternate, which was in fact used at the first test, despite Celotex reservations as expressed to you about the prospects of passing with decorative cladding?
Yes, and I think that slide, which says 80%, shows that actually, well, demonstrates that there was some confidence in that selection.
Yes, I see. If we stick with your statement, paragraph 49, please, and go over the page, I just want to ask you about something you say there. And you say, at the top of the page, considering all of this, it was collectively decided, with PE making the ultimate sign-off, that we would use 8mm of Marley Alternate fibre cement cladding, which was common in the marketplace, and at an A2 reaction had a good fire rating. This would allow us to be transparent with the list of materials used in the text. You say with PE making the ultimate sign-off. Was that because PE, Paul Evans, was ultimately the decision maker in respect of the first test and what should comprise the components in the first test?
Yes, and that doesn't mean that Paul would have chosen those components, but it means that ultimately he would have to agree to and make a decision on what would happen next and what they would be. So obviously lots of different options were spoken about, and people had an opportunity to present a view, but as I said before, my understanding is that Paul would ultimately make all final decisions as to what would happen.
Yes. You say he would make all final decisions as to what would happen. That's your general
Yes.
view, knowledge, evidence
Yeah.
about his role.
That's right. I think John was closely supervised by the thing. I don't think John had any autonomous decision-making process, and they would work very closely together. As I said before, the contact between individuals is not just based upon meetings, for example, where you see here's a meeting and here's a record of a meeting. I mean, they're virtually on top of each other in their proximity.
Right.
And so they would converse informally a lot, I think.
Well, we're going to come to look a little bit more closely at that in due course, Mr. Hayes. Just on this paragraph, in the last sentence of paragraph 49, there at the top of the page, you say, this would allow us to be transparent with the list of materials used in the test. Now, it's right, isn't it, that this transparency was important because anybody who wanted to rely on a BR135 classification would need to know exactly what the tested system was, wouldn't they?
That's correct.
And is it right to say that you saw such transparency as a positive factor which would distinguish Celetex from Kingspan?
Yes.
And that's because, as I think you'd confirmed earlier, that there was a view within Celetex at the time that the Kingspan approach was not transparent, to put it at its lowest.
Absolutely correct.
And that Celetex did not want to copy that approach.
No, they didn't at this point in time.
They didn't at this point in time. Now, that qualification is an interesting one. Do you mean that at a point later, Celotex did start to want to copy that approach?
Yes.
Now, we'll come to it, but in a sentence, can you tell me when?
Well, from my perspective, it was after the second successful test to 8414.
You mean the second test, which was successful?
Yes.
There was only one successful test.
I beg your pardon, I misspoke.
No, I just want to be absolutely accurate.
Yeah.
So May 2014.
At some point after that, things would go wrong.
Right. Just focusing on the 8mm of Marley Eternit, at the time it was selected, that's a cement or cementitious fibreboard, isn't it?
Yes.
Did you think at the time that that was genuinely representative of what was commonly used in the market as a cladding panel?
Yes, I did. And although I didn't have an idea of how much of the market it made up, I think I had an understanding that it would limit the product in some ways, because if you have lots of different cladding panels available on the market and they have lots of different fire ratings, and you are going to have one in your test which has a pretty good fire rating, that is going to limit you to what you could use. And I think there was still this idea that a field of applications report would open that up, and that there would be the possibility of using fibre cement, but also anything else which was at least as good as that.
At least as good in
Fire
performance
performance,
terms.
yes.
Let's turn to the February 2014 test. You attended that test, I think, didn't you?
That's correct.
At Watford,
Yes.
at the BRE Burn Hall there.
Yep.
And that system that was tested included an 8mm Marley Eternit Natura cladding.
That's correct.
Is it right that the fire was extinguished early at 28 minutes or 26 minutes in fact, because the flames were extending past the top of the rig?
That's correct.
Now, you say in your statement at paragraph 54, if we can just go over the page, in the first line there, you say, myself, JR, PE and RW did not understand at the time that flames out of the top of the structure would constitute a test failure. Now, I just want to show you what Mr. Roper says in his statement and just ask you about the difference. Can we go to CEL 30010052 at page 12, please? I'd like to look at paragraph 5.27 in the middle of the page there. Yeah, he says he attended the test, and in the second line, the test did not go well and was stopped after 26 minutes. There was an obvious failure as the flames reached the top of the test rig before the specified time. So he says it was obvious. You say that you didn't understand at the time that flames out of the top of the rig would constitute a test failure. Can you account for the difference in understanding between you?
So I can only speak for my own recollection, but my memory is that the primary result that you have to get is outlined in BR135, and it's to do with the temperature rise of the thermocouples. But I think that temperature rise is limited to the first 15 minutes. So it says you must not raise the temperature by X within the first 15 minutes of the test. And And so even though the test is stopped at 26 minutes, you have the potential that actually you would have met that criteria. So my memory is that there was confusion between all of us, including John and Rob, that we weren't sure whether, just because the test had been stopped at 26 minutes, which was early, whether we might still be able to pass the test.
I see. So it wasn't obvious to you that the fact that the test had been stopped at 26 minutes was a sure sign that it had failed?
No.
Right. Now, you say Phil Clark was present. Do you remember him saying anything about what he could see?
I don't really. I know that he would have said that the test is stopped because the flames are extending above the top of the rig. But I don't think he explained that explicitly that meant it had failed.
Right. So I think I've got your thoughts at the time, at least, that you didn't think that the flames extending past the top of the rig necessarily meant that the test had failed.
No, although I know now that is not correct.
Now, Mr. Roper goes on to say at paragraph 528 that, in the second line there, that Phil told me, he says, Phil told me he shared Rob's view that the insulation had performed relatively well, but the cladding panel had cracked, and that once fire had entered the cavity, there was not much that could be done. Do you remember being party to that conversation?
No, I don't remember that. I don't think it was a formal conversation where everybody goes off into a meeting room. I think that people are standing around. So you've got the test rig, you've got guys who are sort of making sure the fire's out. I think that David and Perina there from IFC, and so you've got people standing in sort of different groups in different places. So I don't remember being party to that conversation.
Right. Let me show you paragraph 529. Mr. Roper says, following the end of the test, Rob, Ian Cooper, Phil and I, note that you're not referred to there, had a discussion whilst at the BRE testing centre. Phil said that he had seen worse fails and suggested that Celetex might want to strengthen the outside of the test rig in order to counteract the cracking of the Marlier Turnip panels. I told Phil that the Marlier Turnip panels were also available in 12mm, in addition to the 8mm panels used in the test, and Phil responded that he thought that thickening the panels to 12mm might suffice. Just pausing there, were you party to that conversation, or did you know about it?
Not that I remember.
Right. And he goes on, Phil also joked that Celetex could use a 6mm cement particle board like Kingspan. Again, were you party or privy to that discussion, or did you hear about that?
I don't remember that or remember Phil
Right.
offering that comment.
Do you remember whether the BRE gave any advice in relation to the design of a test that might pass that you were aware of at that time?
I think that John later told me, or about the comment from Phil about that the 12mm board might be enough to make it pass. And I'm sure that a view was formed that the test had done pretty well, that it was seen to be a very close failure, and that a small change, such as the addition of 12mm thickness, would be enough to put it over the line.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I've got 4 or 5 more questions before coming to the end of this topic.
Would you rather finish the topic now?
I would rather finish the topic now, if that's all right with the panel and with the witness.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
you're happy to go on for another 5 minutes or so.
That's
are you?
absolutely, yeah, please do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. Now, after the test, you drove Mr. Roper back to the office. Do you remember that?
I think that Rob was driving, and then
Right.
someone was in the passenger seat and one of us was in the back.
Right. Okay. Do you remember that Mr. Roper called Paul Evans en route
I do,
and to tell him the result of the test?
yeah.
Do you remember from your side of the hearing what he told Mr. Evans?
I think I'm correct that the call was on speakerphone.
So you could hear both sides of the conversation.
Yes.
Can we go to paragraph 54 of your statement on page 18? You say in the third line, we discussed the fact that we felt as though the fact that the test had been stopped before the 30-minute mark suggested the rig had not passed, but that if the rig could pass the thermocouple data, it might just pass. Was it you who said that?
No. I believe actually it was primarily a conversation between John and Paul.
Right.
I think the bit about the thermocouples might have been discussed in the car before that call.
I see. That's before the call. And then you go on to say at paragraph 55, JR telephoned PE from the car as he wanted to find out how the first test had gone. The he would be PE there. He seemed extremely keen to find out from the BRE as soon as possible what the outcome of the first test was. There was a lot of emotion from JR and PE related to the first test result. Why do you say that?
I think it was very clear from the conversation. Paul sounded very disappointed that it had passed, but also he was telling John, okay, do you think it might have passed? When do you think we can find out? Okay, you need to get onto Phil, you need to get onto the BRE and find out.
Right. When you say a lot of emotion, can you just be a bit more specific?
Very fast talking. When people speak, you can hear their sort of tone goes up and becomes higher. There's a lot of quick backwards and forwards. He's expressing that we need to find out as quickly as possible, and also hope, as in so you think we might have passed. So there's a chance that we've passed.
Right.
Okay, we need to explore that. We need to get onto them.
Okay, thank you. You've brought that to life very well. Can I just ask you to look at paragraph 56 at the bottom of the page? You say, following pressure applied from JR on the BRE to inform us of the first test result, PC telephoned JR confirming that we had failed the first test on the basis of the fire emerging from the top of the structure. My involvement in the wider discussion that ensued following the failure was limited. When was the telephone call from Phil Clark to Mr. Roper? Do you remember?
So I never witnessed a telephone call. I think it would have been something that I was told about, possibly by John. My impression was that it was fairly quickly after the first test, or after the date of the first test, possibly within a couple of days.
Right, I see. So this is something John Roper passed on to you, but you weren't on that call?
No.
I see. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment? I've come to the end of
Yes,
this
that
topic.
suits you, does it?
Yes.
Good. We're going to have a break now, Mr. Hayes, so we can all get some lunch. We'll come back at 2:05, please. And again, I have to ask you, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you. 2:05, please.